so if you guys have questions, kind of shout out. I know Eric is the moderator, and I pretty much have free reign to talk as long as or as little as I want, right? And I'm going to apologize in advance if you have seen any of my recent talks, like at NASBO or things. Some of these are going to be kind of familiar. I was feeling a little self-conscious because a lot of these talks ended up kind of being repetitive, and so I've shortened some things. My intention is to have more kind of Q&A time at the end. I usually like to just run right up to the end, and then I don't have to deal with questions. But this way, we can maybe do some kind of interactive. You can ask questions and get to some of the information that is pertinent for you folks. So, as Eric said, I am the National White-Nosed Coordinator for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and what I'm going to talk about today is kind of provide this kind of basic information, go through distribution and the state of knowledge, current state of knowledge. Some of my slides are a little dated, but we'll get there. Coordination and current efforts that we're doing with the service, coordinating the investigation and the management. We're going to talk a bit about early response, containment, and right now we're working on a national plan, which has been taking up most of my time of late. And then talk a little bit about resources at the end, and tell you guys a little bit about what's coming up. So this is going to be kind of repetitive to some of you, many of you perhaps, but I thought it's a good place to start always to kind of show what the progression is and to give a real kind of solid idea about what the timeline has been, because depending on what you read, it sounds like we've been at this a lot longer than we really have. So back in 2007, white-nosed gonorrhea hit the scene in New York State. Was known at 4 sites. Actually, there was a site that was then found from 2006 from photographs. So 4 sites were known in 07, all in the eastern capital region of New York State, kind of right between the Catskill Mountains and the Adirondacks. Jumping forward to 2008, I don't know if people might be able to see this real well, but this is at the county scale. Then this is when white-nose really hit and started to spread throughout western New England and New York. Those of you who don't know, New York is not part of New England. Just a little peccadillo that I like to point out, because people usually tend to lump everything up in the Northeast, the little states, right? Anyway, so it spread. This is really when the states got together. Al Hicks and I know from New York, and Scott Darling in Vermont, and folks in Connecticut really started to talk to each other. The service became involved that January, and we kind of they asked us, the folks in New England and New York asked us to get involved to help out. So it was really just a couple of years ago in 08. At that time, 4 states were affected, 38 known sites. Jumping forward to last winter, we saw the big spread, pretty much down the Appalachians, jumped to 9 states and 81 known affected sites. And now to give you a different perspective, these are the actual locations, or close to the actual locations for a lot of these sites. So you can see that in between these affected sites, there are sites that are believed to be unaffected or potentially unaffected, so it's kind of a smattering. And this is how things were up until this fall, basically. Now, I've switched computers. I don't have GIS on my laptop anymore, so I haven't been able to actually put the current data into GIS format, so you'll have to make do with my lines here. But these are the new sites. So basically what we've seen up until very recently this year are filling in the gaps. Sites that are nearby, known affected sites are becoming affected. Bats are dying. And we have, basically the last holdout in western New York has now been affected as of a couple of weeks ago. We know that. It's moving a little bit further north, and again filling in a lot of central and eastern Pennsylvania. Now that was the case up until just last week. Now, as many of you are probably aware, white-nose had jumped the border here into Tennessee. There's a site in eastern Tennessee here, Sullivan County, that has been confirmed as being affected. Now this is a major jump, not so much in proximity. It's actually not all that far from the affected site in Virginia, so it's not really terribly surprising. But it jumps into a new state for the first time this year, and more importantly, jumps into a new Fish and Wildlife Service region. So we're now into Region 4, which has political and other components to it. And it kind of, I think, hints at what's to come here. I think we've been pretty lucky up until now. If you're not aware of the way this works, usually we have seen kind of spread that happens. It starts kind of showing up in January and February, but we could be finding new affected sites up until April. So I think we've been lucky thus far, but I think this is just the beginning. I hate to be a real pessimist. That's the upside of my job. I get to be a downer on all these talks, and talking about dead bats and spreading disease, but that's what they pay me for. So, so here I am. Anyway, now we're up to 10 states, 99 known affected sites. I suspect we may hear some interesting news from Canada as well this year. They have not yet done their surveys, so I'm not sure what. I think it's going to be again a couple more weeks or months before we learn there. But there were a couple suspect sites in Ontario last year, and of course then another big political boundary that will raise the stakes. So I talked about being a downer. Here's the trend from New York. This is pretty much what we've been experiencing year after year. The numbers continue to decline. We have not seen any real sign of resistance or recovery in a lot of these sites. There are some kind of anomalous situations. Some sites appear to be more affected than others. I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Some species appear to be harder hit than others. There are occasional finds in New York and New England of sites that have a lot more bats in them than we thought they had. I'm hoping that's going to be something that we'll continue to find, but I suspect these are just blips on the long spiral downward. So what do we know about white nose syndrome? Again, some of these are a little bit old at this point, but we'll just run through them. Over 90% mortality at many of the affected sites. Spreading rapidly, behaving like a pathogen. All 6 northeastern cave bats have been affected till now. This again is a dated number as of last summer. We estimated about 1 million bats had died, or a little over 1 million bats. Obviously this number is just going to be going up. Thus far there's no evidence of bacterial, viral, or some sort of parasitic cause. So some of these bullets keep going back to the point of the fungus being the causative agent. That still hasn't technically been confirmed yet. There's different opinions, holdouts, they're not on the fungus bus necessarily. They think there might be some other, contaminants or some other virus that we haven't detected yet. And it is possible, but I believe it's unlikely. So I mentioned susceptibility seems to be a little bit different, sometimes by species or microclimate in some of these sites. The specific fungal infection is common to the affected sites, so again, supporting the fact of, or the hypothesis that the fungus is the causative agent. Pretty certain at this point that recovery to pre-white nose population levels will take many years, if it's ever even possible. And this is something I'll come back to again. This is a new bullet. Bats can become affected or infected from affected environments. They don't necessarily have to come in contact with other affected bats. What we know about the fungus, it's a newly described fungal species named Geomyces destructans. Most people probably know that. It's what they call a cold-loving fungus, so it's got an optimal growth between 5 and 14 degrees centigrade, so 50 to 60 degrees or so Fahrenheit. It's not really that cold, but that's what they call it. So to reinforce a point here about the cold and northern aggression, this is not necessarily a northern problem. If you look at this line, you can't read it in the back here, but this isopine here shows the 20-degree centigrade average maximum January temperatures over 20-year time frame. So basically, it's plenty cold enough where we are now and in the south for white nose to come down and survive. And as we know, sites underground are fairly stable. It doesn't really matter where you are, within reason here. The conditions underground are going to be very similar and conducive to the growth of Geomyces destructans. So we know that fungus invades the tissues of hibernating bats, the characteristic white muzzle.